Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today, I wanted to talk about a recent summit that was held in Santa Marta, Colombia, regarding transitioning away from fossil fuels. And I thought, who better to talk about that, because this relates to climate change, than meteorologist and founder of, I screwed up the beginning.
I didn't see it. I didn't catch it.
I
Not a
screwed up
chance.
the beginning. Okay.
I just took a sip of coffee, so, just in the zone. I'm good.
I'll just pick up from where I was introducing you.
Sure.
And I thought, who better to come back on the show and talk about this than broadcaster, meteorologist, and founder at Stanfield Technologies, Kevin Stanfield. Kevin, welcome back.
Great to see you again, Alex. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here. I saw, as soon as I saw this about fossil fuels and moving away from it and the talk about climate change with the 60 countries attending, I thought, well, I just talked with Kevin about climate change well, it turned out it was 2 months ago, but 2 months ago. And I thought, let's have you back and let's have a chat about this.
Yeah, sounds great and glad to be here. It was certainly an interesting summit that I think netted some interesting results, and the current state of the world definitely dovetailed with the timing of this in a few interesting ways.
It did. I know the summit was pulled together by Netherlands and Colombia were the two host countries, joint hosts for this, and it was to make things the change from fossil fuels faster than what the UN was doing. But is it a little too late? We've already had other summits in place, like the Paris Accord years ago, and we didn't meet those targets. So, what should we think about this summit? What can we get out of it?
Well, to start off on a fun note, I suppose we'll say, listeners and viewers, how many times do I reference trees over the course of this particular podcast episode? The best time to plant a tree was yesterday, and the second best time is today. There's one. Because the conversations have shifted drastically from Paris, which was now 10 years ago, away from policy now into practicality, especially as we as a species have hit these amazing technological milestones where we can start having discussions about implementation. So we're no longer necessarily focused on just the ideas, but now a lot of the how do we build this? So no, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's too late. You can make an argument that, yeah, in some capacities it is, that we're starting to see the tipping points come a little faster. And I think it was, oh gosh, was it Oregon University? Oregon State University who said that we have about 4 more years before we hit some major tipping points. And when we cross certain thresholds, there's just no coming back because we'll enter climatological feedback loops. But if we can continue to bulwark against that now, we absolutely should. And so Paris discussed where we needed to go. And the most recent summit is taking that in a very different direction because Santa Marta is saying, okay, how do we get this in place as soon as possible?
So we've kind of moved away from the talking about it stage to now action. Do.
And
It's time to do.
yes, and some of it is the plan of attack, and to not put too fine a point on it, because this is a talking point we wanted to address, the war in Iran. Some of it is also about playing defense. And that is to say, it was not just a climate summit, but also an energy security summit. So you can look at the massive fuel reserve, for instance, that Japan has. Not every country has that sort of luxury. And as a result, how do you bulwark yourself against something like that? Against, hey, this strait is blocked, and therefore we no longer have access to fossil fuels. Well, the safer alternative is to say, okay, well, renewables don't rely on a strait and don't rely on imports. We can generate this from home, and as a result, become energy independent. So there's that layer to factor in as well.
Well, that was actually going to be one of the other questions I was going to approach you about is the geopolitical climate that's going on, most notably the Iran-US war, is that now people have understood how dependent they are on such small little areas of the globe, or whether it be a provider or even at the minimum, I think it's a 2 mile wide piece of water, how dependent they are that we really do have to find other ways and move away from fossil fuels. We've got to find other ways of creating energy to move forward.
And isn't it a beautiful thing that renewables no longer feel like a fringe technology? It's
Yeah.
just part, it's part of the daily lexicon. There's something good to be said there. But yet, to talk a little bit to the US-Iran war and how it influenced the talks. Well, first out of the gate, this all started in late February, and just through the month of March in Europe, I pulled some data. Solar Handle 24 tripled net sales in March. NPAL saw orders rise 30%, both solar panel companies. So that says a lot. Now we're going from climate slogan to this is a household budgeting issue. You can take a look at there are laws in Germany coming into effect that are going to net out to at least 10,000 euro costs per household in order to meet the demands of their energy grid. Chinese President Xi Jinping calls for a hastening of their new energy systems, which also safeguard their security. And that involves developments in both the nuclear and hydroelectric sectors. So that's the positive benefit that you might be able to positive in air quotes benefits that you're seeing. But the other side of it, and we're seeing this too, some countries have to double down on what they know because they can't afford to go in the other direction. So it's not all sunshine, roses, and solar panels.
So what about those other countries and what they're going to suffer, because of what's going on? And is it because they don't have the ability to leverage renewables?
They don't have the ability to leverage renewables, and this is probably diving into another talking point we wanted to
Yeah.
address, but there are some nations that are dealing with immediate crises. That's been the biggest issue all the way along. The governments of the world at times can kick the can down the road because, frankly, we get to this place where, hey, we could spend money on this now, but not see the immediate effects of it. It's the aquarium principle. For people who've owned aquariums out there, it is a lot easier to impact the amount of water in a goldfish tank than it is in a 60 or 120 gallon aquarium. These changes take time. So if you're spending money on future problems, you're potentially not working through the immediate crises that might be affecting nations. It might be employment. It might be, I mean, natural disasters are obviously a very big one. Public transportation, public infrastructure. What about inflation? What about food prices? Of course, of late, fuel costs. So there are nations in the world that are just dealing with those immediate problems, and those immediate problems are also impacted by that geopolitical landscape. So how are they then supposed to say, "Oh, okay, well, let's just cut our way into renewables"? They can't. So they're forced to double down on what they know and hopefully uh, help remove some of the infrastructure or take away some of the energy from the nations that are moving away from those old energy sources when that becomes an element. So, if there comes a day where a nation who's still developing and in the early stages of development for renewable energy, maybe they have the opportunity to say, hey, listen, Germany, you've got some extra fuel stored away. Mind if we buy some of that since you don't need it anymore? If that's the reality that we get to, that's still a better place than we were 10 years ago.
Well, it's interesting that you're talking about time here because one of the things I was going to ask you is that a lot of times when it came to climate change and renewable energies and fossil fuels, it was always going to be, and it always seems to be, it's someone else's problem. Let others worry about it because, as you said, we're not going to see the immediate benefits of it. Our maybe our children will, or grandchildren will, but we'll be long gone. So it just gets, as you said, kicking the can down the road. But that seems to have changed now based on some of the other things that are happening in the world that time now is recognized as right now. We have to do something now.
Correct. It comes back to trees again. I mean, a society grows great when the elderly plant trees whose shade they'll never sit in. And I don't want to misattribute that quote, but it's a good one, and that makes that easy getaway. I mean, again, the immediate national crises will almost always overtake. You could look at Trump's argument, right, against Paris. Essentially, was that the international clean energy development goals would put far too much burden and strain on American workers and businesses and their economic development against their current set of national goals. And that immediately means the short-term economic pressures are going to outdo the long-term economic benefit from moving in the direction of clean energy. And because there are plenty of inverses to the argument you just made, which is still a good one, right? I mean, creating energy independence that offers employment opportunities in renewables. It offers lower exposure to all the fuel price shocks that many of us are seeing. A Canadian here, right? I mean, seeing the fuel price jump to $1.70, $1.80 doesn't feel great. And if that sticker shock was a little bit lower because renewables were a bit stronger, great. But those benefits don't necessarily take effect as quickly as we want them to. That said, though, the net benefit could still occur in under a decade, and that's something that I think we need to be more focused on. There are lots of opportunities to create solutions that exist in under a decade that then help us snowball. So, over a decade from now, we've already set ourselves up in the right direction with stronger grids.
So does that mean moving away from fossil fuels is and could be something realistic that even those of us today, we could actually see the impact?
Oh, 100%. And the other thing to consider too, countries aren't starting in the same place. I mean, some happen to be wealthy importers that have the capital and technology for it, right? Others are going to be reliant on oil and gas and coal revenues to fund their public services. So we still all need affordable energy access, and just transitioning away, it involves figuring out how to fairly share responsibilities. And I think that what happened in Santa Marta shows countries are very willing to do that, and that
Mhm.
certain partnerships are going to come across that will help leverage countries that are operating from two very different areas of that platform to create that equality. But those steps are going to take time, and I think that every opportunity we get to have meaningful jumping off points is incredibly valuable.
I think it's kind of interesting that you mentioned some countries may have to sell coal for revenue to fund, renewable energy. It seems like a contradiction. We have to do something over here that's bad, continue selling and mining coal to get something good over here. So maybe that's
Exactly.
the trade-off so that we can get that balance shifted.
Well, exactly. And it's such a fascinating thought to think some countries are selling coal to fund the solar plant. And that's the reality. You can't just say, all right, we're shuttering the coal mine today, because the downstream implications of that and the trickle down economics of that are colossal to think about. But that's the eventual reality, and everything is eventual in that space. At least that's got to be the goal. But getting there is going to take some time still.
But we can get there. It will take time, and we could, because I
Mhm.
think you said 4 years before we hit a couple of potential tipping points. If we can make enough progress in these 4 years, perhaps that 4 years could be extended to 6 or 8, or
Mhm.
fingers crossed. Hey, we're far enough away. We don't need to worry about that.
I'll get a little ideological for a second, Alex.
Sure.
There is a world where hopefully these UN groups can meet and say, all right, what incentive can we offer to companies in this area that doesn't feel overly profitable to generate technologies that help push us in the right direction, as opposed to taking the technology we have now and using that as a stopgap method. And it goes back to that we're working now on defense. What do we do to attack the problem? And there isn't a ton of profit in that. So how do we develop that fund? And to jump back to the question you asked, sorry, I'll let you speak about it in a minute. I
Go
promise on
ahead.
this one. The Oregon State University came out with a list of 20, they identified about 27 amplifying feedbacks. So to speak to that for a second, to give context to viewers and listeners here, that is to say, we'll get to a point where the melting Arctic ice means less sunlight's reflected, so the Earth absorbs more heat, which melts more ice, and then it's gone. Thawing permafrost, more methane release, which traps more heat, which leads to more thaw. The death of the Amazon rainforest means it's no longer absorbing as much CO2, but is releasing more CO2, which means it continues to release more. Those are some feedback loop examples where once we get to a certain point, we cannot stop those effects from continuing.
All I was going to add is, as you were talking there at the beginning, I couldn't help but think of some of the pushback that AI data centers are getting because of the pollution that they're creating, whether it be the water or what's in the air, is that if we use renewables, perhaps there's an opportunity to reduce that pollution as well. that's being created by these data centers.
Yes, and so we need to continue to push toward what you could essentially call the age of energy resilience and getting ourselves to a
Mm,
place where energy no longer is a problem. That is a real world that we could get to, especially as we focus on the fact that the planet's giving us everything we need to push ourselves there. We're just still caught up in some older threads that need to gradually go the way of the dinosaur.
yeah, we could go the way of the dinosaur if we don't pay attention.
Also true.
Any final thoughts you'd like to share, Kevin, on this?
There are things we can do in the meantime. And I think that it's important to address some of those. There are elements that came out of Santa Marta that I really hope we can all urge our policymakers and our immediate governance as a society to push toward, and that would be involving better frameworks around the insulation and heat pumps in the new structures that we create, smarter grids when we're developing new electric systems, electrify where possible. That's vehicles, that's heating, public transit as well. Obviously, more clean power, high on the list, and we've seen that. Cut methane as quickly as possible and ensure policy reflects that. That is to say, reductions from oil, gas, agriculture, batteries, grid upgrades. This is all huge. Um, and this is a huge one because protecting vulnerable households. Get policy in place around rebates and targeted support and maintain it. Because there are nations that did, hey, here's a solar panel subsidy, and then it went away. And that hurts because
Mm,
the more of that we can maintain, the better off we end up being. And proactive strategies as soon as possible for weather adjacent disasters. And again, speaking as someone in Western Canada, whatever we can do to be more proactive around wildfires and whatever funding can be put in that place is absolutely massive. Germany has that renewable energy law in place I mentioned, and that's also a huge one. And lastly, stop making the problem worse where we can.
yeah.
If you can't move forward, at the very least, stop pushing backwards.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I do like the fact that it seems instead of just talking about it, we're now shifting to okay, how do we do it? Let's just we have to do it. We have to move forward. I'm happy that this conference has finally got roughly a third of countries to actually think that way now, rather than just yakking about it and false promises, actually
And,
doing something now.
and that third of a country's represents roughly 55% of the emissions that we're trying to reduce.
Yeah. So there's a
So we're
bonus
in a
to
good
that.
place. Yeah.
Yeah. Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me, Alex.